Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here in Barcelona for another year of IoT Solutions World Congress. As was introduced, my name is Mark Cavalier, and I'm a research director at Deloitte. And in that capacity, me and my colleagues have had the opportunity over the last several years to watch and participate in the development and the evolution of the industrial Internet of Things and an entire constellation of other technologies that are giving rise to what we all think of, or certainly what I think of as the fourth industrial revolution. And it's really what we're all here for. It was really interesting walking in this morning, not just looking at our show floor, but at the other show floors that are going on to see the range of technologies, both physical and digital, that are beginning to impact all of us. But it's important, we think, to consider that a salient, maybe the most salient impact of an industrial revolution is the impact that it has on the people that do the work. If we go back historically, and we just had a robust conversation backstage about this, if we go back historically, we can see how the delivery of new technologies not only have changed the way we make things, but have literally changed the form and structure of the organizations that make them. And so we thought for this session, it would be interesting and maybe appropriate to spend some time considering those impacts. As Deloitte looks at it, we'll see if we have this. As Deloitte looks at it, there's three different dimensions that are salient here. We can think of things in terms of their proximity, we can think of level of automation, and we can think of the category within which talent actually exists. And we can look at this, just to sort of tease the conversation about a little bit, we can look at it in terms of a few key facts just to get ourselves thinking about this. For example, 53% of companies today, this is according to Deloitte's research, are claiming that they are using new digital technologies in fundamentally new ways to change the business. I think this is particularly interesting as a remote worker. In the last decade, the number of remote workers globally has increased 115%. And 94% of all new job growth in the US at least has come from alternative forms of work. So we are seeing changes unfold, and what we'd like to do is think about with our audience, with our panel, how those are going to unfold in the future. And to do that, I'm just incredibly excited for the people that we have to join us. So I'm going to introduce them from the end here. We have Jennifer Bennett, Jen, who comes to us from Google, the Office of the CTO. We have Martin Gruber, who comes to us, Director of Manufacturing Intelligence from Caterpillar. We have Shivani Maitreya, who's my colleague in our UK practice, who leads organizational design efforts. And then we have Alexei Urshov, who comes to us from IBM Watson IoT, where he's a vice president there. So I'm going to turn to them and begin asking questions in a minute. But before I do, I want to observe a couple of things. One is we have microphones here, and so we'll also be watching the audience. We'd love to hear the questions that you have, and so throughout the panel, if I see someone walk up, I will make every effort to attend to them and let them ask their question. In order to prepare for that, I thought I would ask for a little bit of audience participation from the outset. So I'm going to ask you two questions, and we're just going to get answers maybe to level set the panel based on a show of hands. The first question, three options. You can vote pessimist, optimist, or I don't know. Okay, so we'll take a show of hands. As we look, and here's the question. As we look at the future and consider the impact of this fourth industrial revolution, technologies like the IoT, artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation in general, as we look at the impact on the workforce, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or I don't know about relative to the overall impact? So let's go with the pessimist first. Raise your hand if you're pessimistic about this. Few people? Okay, we have a few pessimists on the left-hand side. Who's optimistic? Oh, good, all right, a lot of optimism. And who just doesn't know? And a few I don't know. Okay, so an overwhelmingly optimistic crowd for us today. Terrific. Next question. How many of you, given that we have a lot of optimists here, how many of you feel that you could clearly articulate your organization's approach to the future of work? Raise the hands if you feel yes, you could. Okay, a lot fewer. So panel, we have our work cut out for us. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the panel. I'm going to start with Alexi. So welcome, Alexi. It's nice to have you here. With respect to this notion of the future of work, Industry 4.0, the industrial Internet of Things, I'm wondering if you could start by grounding us in, from your perspective, what does this actually look like in reality, on the shop floor, on the ground? Give us a story.
Thanks.
Try it now.
Thank you, Mark.
There you go.
Good. Let me start with one example, which will bring it home. Let's talk about cognitive visual inspection. So, Mark, imagine you're about to buy a nice new car. And I know definitions of nice new car vary. I'm living in Munich now, so nice new car there starts from about 100,000 euros. But let's assume you're about to spend 50,000 or 60,000 euros or dollars on a nice new car. You come to the dealership and you expect the car to be perfect. If the dealer tells you, there is this small paint job defect, not big deal, you're not going to buy it for full price, right?
Right.
So now let's move to the paint shop in one of the major auto manufacturers. How is it done? It's actually incredibly complex, multi-stage process designed to produce the perfect paint surface. Very complex, and many things can go wrong in this process. So tiny air bubbles can form in micro cavities and ruin the surface. Specks of dust, small scratches, pressure, air pressure, humidity, temperature might not be exactly right, so that the viscosity of the paint is not exactly right, so it starts running. Spraying robot starts malfunctioning. So a lot of things can go wrong. And while the painting itself now has been done by robots for quite some time now, and I hope we all agree that this is a terrible job for humans to have, with all these fumes and the temperature and humidity, bad conditions. However, the inspection is still done by humans. The inspection is still done in the big light tunnels, and that is done by humans. And humans are error-prone. So concentration varies throughout the day. You get distracted, you get tired, and you miss some of these tiny defects sometimes. Well, this is about to change. So we're now working with some of our partners on introducing what's an IoT cognitive visual inspection for quality for automotive paint shop. So here's how it works. So first we start with feeding thousands of images to Watson, showing Watson what good looks like and what different types of defects look like. Then we train the model on the cloud and deploy it to the edge system, edge computing system on the factory floor. And then Watson analyzes the images and gives an answer in milliseconds or tens of milliseconds. And sample answers are no defect here, 99% confidence. Watson always gives defect or no defect and gives the confidence level. No defect here, 99% confidence, or here's this defect in exactly this location on the car body diagram, defect type number 16, confidence level 85%. And then depending on where the thresholds for the confidence levels are set, it either goes through automatically or it gets raised to the human operator who will then look at the defect and say, yeah, that's right. But the inspector now is handling only the exceptions. So routine operation is done by the machine. And well, this is one example. Of course, it dramatically improves the throughput, reduces labor costs, improves quality, improves consistency, because now you can deploy the same models in the inspection points around the world. It improves consistency and just makes things better. It's one of the things that arguably has to be done, and it will be done that way. Now, this is auto paint shop. Then we can use the same technology for printed circuit boards, for LCD panels, and we're working with Deloitte on a whole class of solutions for drone visual analytics.
Okay, so we're using the human as the escalation point, but
Exactly.
not necessarily for the routine. Marty, from a Caterpillar perspective, when you deploy technologies like that, what's the reaction that you're seeing on the shop floor? How do you?
Well, first, I
How do
love
people
Alexi's vision. I want to get there, but there's a little bit of a gap, but it's a great vision. The key thing on the shop floor is getting the people engaged early in the process. I think if they're always a little concerned about what you're going to do with them, digitizing their job, the different pieces of it. But if you involve them early in the process and they understand it's going to benefit them, you get a lot of buy-in. Several of our projects have gone live with the pilots, and we're getting a lot of great feedback from the customers, so to speak. They want more of it, and they like it, and it gives them clarity in their job role, and I think that's a powerful piece. The perfect quality that Alexi was talking about. People want to do a good job, and providing this data and helping them do a better job and understand what the requirements are for the job, they get better job satisfaction. So we're seeing people actually embrace it after they overcome the initial fear. And by having them in early, it really cements it in for them.
Okay. Jen, Google, maybe a little bit of a different environment from Caterpillar. Would you add any caveats, or does the story change if you look at a different environment?
Well, I mean, first I could speak from a Google and some of the operations that we do. I think it's very, very similar. You want to include the people in any sort of change and get the input and what you're trying to do is deliver technology that helps and augments their abilities. I think from a number of the customers that we work with, we see the same thing. With this, some of the next generation of workers that are coming through, they're looking for the experience that they have when they go home. What's on their device. And I've toured a number of factory floors where some of the younger workers are saying, I just want to Google the answer. Like, I don't want to push the and-on light, and I want to be able to have information at my hands, because that's what we experience every day in our consumer life. And so I think we're starting to see these two worlds start to merge together. But in doing that, being inclusive and really understanding how you can do that is important to keep them engaged.
Terrific, thank you. And Giovanni, so we've heard both Jen and Marty talk about bringing people along, having them understand, gaining buy-in, maybe a little bit, maybe I heard a hint of a little bit of turbulence, Marty, at the start. How are companies, or what advice do we have for companies that are trying to help workers keep up with that kind of a learning environment?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question, and particularly, just with what Jen just said. We do human capital trends every year, and over the past few years, we've seen learning as an area just go up in the ranks in terms of what businesses are saying is a critical business challenge for them. And in fact, in 2017, it was number 2. And who would have thought that learning would be that high? Just a couple of facts. Technical skills that we give employees, they have a shelf life of anywhere between 1.5 to 2 years, maybe even shorter. Our research also tells us that at an average, employees will go through around 6 to 7 hours a week of learning. And yet 60% of people who we spoke to are unhappy and feel their organizations don't provide them with the right opportunities for learning. So that's quite interesting. And I suppose the focus should be on the balance of training. So on one hand, we have technical skills that are constantly changing and evolving very, very quickly. And on the other hand, just going back to the statistic you shared coming out of the 4th industrial revolution around how the nature of jobs is shifting so rapidly, softer skills are going to become quite important, in terms of innovation, collaboration, risk-taking, problem-solving. So organizations have to know where to focus and how the balance of training needs to happen. And therefore, when it comes to technical skills, we are looking at bite-sized training. We are looking at reliance on online tools, training that can be released quite easily. It's easy to, embed in the organization, but equally has to be quite self-driven. Employees have to take a degree of accountability for their own learning. The future worker is going to have quite a few tools available where learning is concerned, be it cognitive tools, AI systems, etc. And it is for organizations to know how to make these tools accessible, and on one side make these tools accessible, but also how to really use coaching, collaboration, on-the-job learning really work. And I think it's this balance that's going to make pretty much all the difference.
I'm going to, I guess I'll direct this question to you, Shivani, but I'm interested in hearing from anyone. Maybe a naive question, but you just spoke a lot about learning and development. And I immediately also thought, well, what about change management? Could you distinguish sort of the classic change management, at least an old view of change management, with what you're talking about with learning and development?
So I suppose the whole idea, and I think this is coming from what Marty said and to an extent what Jen also said, the millennials are bringing about quite a significant shift in how organizations adapt and embed. And so one has to be very clear about what the opportunity is. Is it just about impact on the job? Is it also about the impact on the individual? What am I getting out of the job that I'm doing is going to be quite important. And if you can articulate that, that's the first job of change management done. Get that right, and then you're on the right path. I think that's where I would go.
Terrific.
Yeah, I think when you look at the workforce, we always think about the change management on the workforce, but I think you got to flip it a little bit and do some change management on the leadership, because there's a lot of misconceptions. And quite honestly, what we're seeing is once we put the data in the hands of the people down at the operational layer, I mean, even hourly people are now running the business with this data, and they're doing a better job. They're digital natives, as Jen said, and it's just a powerful thing to watch. And I don't think that the senior people understand how much change management they need to do in their thinking to provide that richness in their work environment. And I think when they understand that they're helping solve the business problems, those people are much more engaged and much happier in their jobs. It's hard to get people to work in manufacturing right now. And we really need to change the way we do business to keep those people engaged and not have a lot of turnover, because there's a lot of talent out there, and it's hard to get it in and get that manufacturing insights. So.
Terrific, terrific. I'm going to take a strategic pause and again invite anyone who has questions to ask them. We've got plenty up here, but I'll just reiterate the invitation. Jump ball for anyone on the panel. I'm going to give you a couple of stats I thought maybe someone might care to react to them. This is based on the work that we've done with MIT on our digital transformation study. So one stat, less than half of respondents, that's 45%, say their companies provide employees with the resources and or opportunities to develop skills and opportunities to thrive in a digital business environment. That's stat one. Stat two, vice president, and Marty, you just spoke about leadership. Vice president and director level respondents in the survey who were not receiving opportunities to develop in a digital environment were 15 times more likely than peers to say they plan to leave their company in less than 1 year, given digital trends. Anyone want to?
Well, I'll jump in and maybe highlight some of the things that we do. I mean, I think everybody is sort of probably familiar with Google and their 20% projects. I think the ability to create space and time for people to do something, learn something new, or do something that they're passionate about. I mean, this is something that's absolutely part of the Google culture, but it's for a good reason. Many of the innovations that have occurred at Google have actually been in these 20% projects. And it's really about people finding people who have common interests to push. And Marty, what you said about data is absolutely true. When you put data in the hands of these people, they can become incredibly creative about what new opportunities might evolve. But it also goes to your point, Shivani, about I'm now corresponding to something that I care about, that I have passion about, that I want to do. And it really starts to transform your ability to have an impact within the organization, but also for your customers.
Terrific. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think the key piece is getting the productivity out of the people. And if you can change the way they're doing business and get them more productive, you're going to get a lot better results. And they'll always come up with a better solution than someone like I would that doesn't do the job every day. So I think it's critical to have them own the business.
Terrific. Right, I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit. One of the axes of the graph that I put up looked at automation, and that in today's world can be kind of a loaded term. We also hear people talk about the concept not of automation, but of augmentation. And so I'm wondering, and maybe Jen, I'll go back to you, or at least I'll start with you. If you could talk about in what ways you're seeing humans and machines come together, maybe to do a better job than either could do alone. Seems like a very Google question to ask.
Yeah, well, look, I think we have plenty of examples of where humans and machines have come together. I mean, manufacturing, there's plenty of examples where we've used robot assist to, lift heavy objects. So instead of people having to, safety issues and health issues, we have examples in medical, right, where we have doctors who are using robotic assist. And I myself had a son who had at a very young age, 9 weeks old, had surgery. And I thank, that we're very grateful for these types of technologies. This is where humans and machines have really come together to work together. And I think these are the opportunities that are interesting. We've got other examples. We just had these hurricane disasters in the US, and they've been using drones to do surveillance so that they can quickly get aid to people. Of course, those drones aren't just drones. There's people who are flying the drones and then taking that imagery and making assessments. So I think we have plenty of examples where people and machines have worked really well together. I think we have examples where it didn't work out so well initially, right, where we had safety issues because of the machines. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to think through the human factors as we bring more machinery, as we automate, as we start to talk about AI and how that works in this environment as well. We've got to start thinking about the human impact of everything that we're doing. I think it's really important. But I will say that we believe at Google that there's a real need for what we call sublinear optimization, right? Where you can't just keep adding people to do things the way you used to do them. You need to really focus on what can you automate. Those tests that humans take a lot of time and is very tedious and tiresome, how do you automate those to free them up to do the other more creative and hopefully more interesting and impactful things? So I think there's a combination there.
Are there other, so you just said things that are tiresome or tedious. Are there other rules, and I guess I'll ask you, Jen, and then I'll come back to you, Alexi, other rules that people should be thinking about for areas where we want to look? Organizations are big and complex.
Yeah.
Where do we look to see or the characteristics of jobs that maybe might benefit from that augmentation versus automation?
I think Alexei gave one example with visual inspection, and we see a number of these as well with some of the image recognition stuff that we do. We see this is becoming, not only are machines able to do it more repeatedly, the humans, as you mentioned, get tired. I would say things that are repeatable, that you find yourself doing multiple times, those are usually very interesting use cases for automation. Things where you have, where you're trying to find correlation that has a broad data set and a lot of complexity, often this is very difficult for humans to see that, and particularly when we start to talk about the long tails, right, where it really gets difficult and the return on investment for human labor is hard to justify. These are great areas where we've seen turning to automation and turning to some of these, machine learning and some of these things has been really beneficial. I'll let others share other insight.
Any to add, or Marty, any for you to add?
Yeah, I think it's huge. Obviously, in the manufacturing environment, when you use a transactional system to move through the supply chain and consume material, it's real challenging with the transactional data and the grief and getting that right. And if you can take the man out of the loop, so to speak, where they're not needed for the repetition, it's the best thing for the system. It helps the system drive your MRP better. So it is critical, but then also for the quality piece, it's definitely where we need to go. We can't keep inspecting quality, and we have to build it in as part of the process and use that technology, because I think Lexi mentioned perfect quality is what we all expect as retail consumers. So you have to make a perfect quality product, but also perfect process doing it.
So recognizing now that I have a tendency to get bored and I don't do a good job on lots of things, are there uniquely and maybe we're talking a little bit about this before, this notion that there are uniquely human tasks that may never be replicated or replaceable by the machine. Any thoughts on whether you see that in a reasonable time frame, whether you see all the work going away or whether they're uniquely human attributes, Alexei?
Sure. So let me continue on this visual analytics example. So before a human would do all the inspection, now machine does the routine inspection, but there is still an inspector, operator, who will handle the exceptions. There is still a need for supervisor who will oversee the whole process around the world with multiple inspection locations around the world and ensure there is consistency and there is consistency in quality and consistency in process. And also supervisor will then handle the defects which haven't been classified yet. These are two jobs. Then there are two more jobs. One is model manager, the person who will own the library of defects and supply the images to train the system, but also then create new model and deploy new model to the edge system on the shop floor, so model manager. And then there is a fourth job of data scientist, the person who will actually use the deep learning system on GPUs and train the model and evolve these models. Curiously, none of these jobs need to be physically in the factory. They could be anywhere around the world. Probably the inspector will need to be somewhere close to the factory, but supervisor could be anywhere around the world, and certainly the same for data scientist and model manager.
Another transition, one of the statistics I gave said, the last statistic suggested that 94% of new jobs created in the United States, at least, in between 2005 and 2015, came in the form of alternative work arrangements. Shivani, it strikes me that now you've got a double whammy, right? I'm growing the number of remote workers that I have, so we're not all coming to campus every day anymore. And furthermore, you might not even really work for me in the classic sense of the word. How well, first of all, do you have any comments on those trends? But then beyond that, how do we think about maintaining things like a company culture, a consistency of service, a willingness to maintain responsibility for the end customer? Unpack that for me a little bit. How do we think about those problems?
So I guess in terms of responding to the comment, I would say the organizations that I work with and I consult with, they're all sort of operating in this, what I like to call an organizational ecosystem. It's not just your standalone company. It is the other associated parts that you work with, and that's becoming increasingly the norm. And we at Deloitte are doing it through our associate model, and it's almost like having a contractor on the balance sheet where they are not working for you. At times they are working with you. And I think in that scenario, it's extremely important to know what your talent pool looks like. How do you break it down into your component parts? And for that, I would go back to the HR organization and say to them that it's no longer adequate or enough to have a talent manager. You need a talent architect. And this is a pretty, I guess, senior role, a role that has a voice on the table in terms of where the business is concerned. And what I see this role doing is identifying what my different talent pools are. Where are they going to come from? And then make it my responsibility as the talent architect to develop relationships with these talent pools. So it is a quid pro quo. It's not just about them understanding me. It's about me understanding them. So I can proactively take a decision on whether or not there's a cultural fit. And in most cases, these ecosystems operate in a very fluid environment. It's fairly flexible. So you are able to monitor and course correct quite quickly, and I think that's how it's going to work.
Anyone else have experience working with alternative workforces and care to comment on?
Well, what I'll say is I think one thing that we're seeing is, in particularly with these alternative workers, is the ability to collaborate. And so the old way of doing things where you might write a document and then when you're done you email it off to people and then everybody has 15 copies of it. What we're starting to see in this new space is that people want to collaboratively work together in the document or in an environment. And so this is really transforming how people work, and at first it's a little bit uncomfortable because you have to share your first work. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. You have to be willing to have a critique, even though it might be your first draft. But this is how I would say that we're seeing a lot of companies, not just Google, a lot of the enterprises we work with are starting to see this transformation happening. Part of it is this next generation of people, of workers, where they're much more collaborative. But I think this is the key, is that collaboration. And I think the other thing I will say is that I think humans, kind of touching on your last question as well, humans are incredibly adaptable. And I think if we've seen anything from history, when things change, humans adapt. And I think this is something that as we see this change coming and evolving, leadership-wise, we need to be aware that people will adapt if we give them space to and to give them the right capabilities. So I think this is something that's important.
Got it. And Marty, how do you see this playing out on the shop floor?
Well, obviously, you got to be there to assemble something, so that you can't do it remotely. But I do see different alternative work schedules starting to come in, people that only want to work maybe 20 hours a week. We can't always get full-time people, so we've got to be more receptive to bringing in a partial workforce and understanding where to use them. But I think the other piece that's key is figuring out what's the best for the people, because there's going to be such a talent grab coming out. If you want to maintain your workforce without having the disruption of turnover, which is really high in manufacturing, you're going to have to be more flexible for people and figure out how to get the best out of them. But build these systems that help those people work in the alternative workforces too. So when you're thinking about automating Industry 4.0, what could you do that would allow them? Maybe you can have a supply chain planner work remotely because they can log into the system now and collaborate live and see the shop floor live and know what's going on and things like that. So I just think you really have to be cognitive of it when you're designing these systems.
For anyone on the panel, we have multiple times throughout this conversation we've invoked millennials or new workers or workers coming into the workforce. I'm old. What about the resident workforce? Does any of this change for the legacy workforce or for older? We know, for example, that the senior category of workers is one of, if not the fastest growing categories of workers. Any changes that we see given different demographics?
So I think there are a couple of things that are changing. I think the older generation, which I think we all, I hasten to add, probably belong to, it's not just you, Mark. I think we are starting to see starting to take a greater accountability for ourselves. So I can tell you that I'm learning how to code. It has nothing to do with what I do, but just to stay relevant, it's a skill I feel I need to acquire. So it's pretty self-driven. The other bit is that this generation, which we can loosely call Generation X, is in very senior positions, and the concept of leadership for this group of people is shifting. It's no longer leader as a solitary figure, leader as a hero. The concept of leadership now is, and I think Jen has used the word a lot of time, group of people who are working in a collaborative manner. Because the environment is changing so quickly, so rapidly, you need to work collectively to be able to address and respond. So as a senior leadership in any organization, you need to start working collectively rather than individually is one thing I'm seeing shift for this generation.
I think the other thing that maybe that comes to mind for me on this topic is, we're starting to see with all of our new user experience and interfaces that they're becoming adaptable and personalized. So I think, what we're going to see is that we're going to be able to bridge many of the generations by this ability to personalize. So it doesn't have to be one view for everybody. It can be the type of way that you like to see or interact with data. I think we're going to start to see, and we've already seen quite a tremendous amount of research in this area. You know, we talked about AI a little bit earlier and how that's going to fundamentally change how we experience data and work with things. I think this is going to be another shift. So stay tuned. I don't think we have all the answers yet, but I certainly see there's some ability for us to do better.
Yeah, I would say, you know, one of the things we're doing when we build our live factory and we look at the platforms we're using, shop floor to top floor, we're building in that structural KPI measurement of our manufacturing processes, which is critical for the leadership. But then we're also building in self-service capability and adaptability, so you can customize your screen layout using some of the capabilities in our SAP Leonardo platform, and then also have that drill down, drill across analytics. So somebody may want to get into the weeds. We're also providing that, because what we found is people don't like to be in data jails, and there's data jails at different levels, and we want self-service and capability that way. So I think it's critical for the workforce, and that helps promote a alternative workforce also.
Do we see other, so we talked about young versus old workers, differences across other socioeconomic breakdowns? No one wants to touch that.
Everyone looked at it, and even could look to the audience.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I'm sure that, you know, I think we probably have a lot more research to do in this space. The one thing that I will say is that I think there's plenty of opportunity. If you can embrace and engage your workforce, there's plenty of opportunity to understand those implications and really start to make an impact across.
Quick check with the audience. Any questions you'd like to, we have some very knowledgeable people. We have a question here. There's a microphone right over here, or I'll try to hear the question and repeat it.
So we talked about the changes that are coming in one industry or individual industries. What about where the industries are kind of across, like supply chain, where like one industry is manufacturing, one industry is kind of shipping the goods, one industry is storing it, and there are lots of government regulations and all. How do you bring the change from end-to-end perspective? Because until it is end-to-end change, it is not going to benefit the humankind.
I could say, at least for the manufacturing piece for us, we've started working, and I look at manufacturing very simple, so that regardless of the factory, somebody sources something, they make something, they deliver it. I mean, most businesses are that way, but how do you start working in each one of those areas, kind of build it up, and then we have a plan to connect them across? Because trying to eat that elephant, you know, in one bite is going to kill you, trying to connect end to end. And there's data everywhere, obviously. Everything's digitized. I love when we say digital transformation. It's really about how do you start building up the operational capability with the end goal in mind, and then start connecting the bridges once you start working through those different verticals. And that's how we're going to connect end to end. And that's really when I see machine learning and you know, AI coming in, because the smaller data, it's really hard to do it, but you've got to get that foundational piece built in each one of those verticals.
You know, we're talking about talent and transformation, and you mentioned supply chain, and obviously logistics is a huge area which is, you know, undoubtedly going to go through some major transformation. So I think it's an apropos topic, and I think how you think about, or how we all think about, what's that next generation of worker going to look like who may be doing, you know, who may be driving today. You know, I think these are all top of mind for everybody, for sure important.
I think one more thing too, Amazon's driving us all to think differently about retail, right? Even in my business, industrial, I'm thinking about how to order one of these large Caterpillar machines online, because sooner or later, that's going to be the expectation, and that available to promise is really hard. I mean, Amazon does some amazing things when you click on the phone and it says it's coming that day and it comes the next day. It's really hard if you haven't tried to do that in a supply chain.
Terrific. Any other audience questions? All right. I warned you guys this would be my final question, and I'm actually going to adapt it just a little bit. I'll just go right down the line. I'll start with you, Alexei, and then we'll end with you, Jen. First, I'd like you to answer for yourself the optimist, pessimist, I don't know question about what you see, whether you're optimistic or pessimistic, or you just don't know, the impact of this coming revolution on the workforce writ large? So that's just a one-word answer. And then the second part of that question is, what is the specific actions that you would like the people in this audience to take or at least think about as they walk out of this session with respect to this topic?
Sure. First, I am optimistic. I think we are on the verge of big transformation. If you think about it, over the next 5 to 10 years, every job you can think of will be either augmented or transformed by AI, and we're just at the verge of that. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Obviously, there will be some pain in the process for some jobs. People will need to adapt, but that has been happening throughout human history, and it's pointless. We cannot stop it. We cannot stop the development of technology. If we cannot stop it, we should lead it. There is a lot of money to be made. I recently read a book by Kevin Kelly, editor of Wired magazine, called The Inevitable. He was saying, well, people will be looking back to 2016, 2017, 20, 30 years from now, and they would think, back then nothing was invented yet. If I could only transport myself back to 2017, when nothing was invented yet. So there is a lot of money to be made with AI. You will see a wave of startups which will become bigger than some of the established companies, representatives of which we have on the panel here. So I am optimistic.
And any steps you'd like people to take walking out of here?
Well, look at your factory, your power plant, your operations, and think where IoT and AI can help, and lead it rather than be left behind.
Okay. Shivani?
Very, very optimistic. I'll take a very simple example of the washing machine and think about what it did to bringing women in the workforce. There's a whole book that's been written about it. So I'm very, very optimistic. The one thought I want people to take with them is the more technology advancement we make, the more it becomes about people, not less. So just think about how that might apply to your context.
Terrific. Thank you. Marty?
I'm very optimistic. I think the key piece is understanding your business outcomes, and it's a business transformation. Don't get overcome by the technology because it's very easy. Just go out and swim around all the lanes you have out there with all the technology, which one to pick. It's important to pick the right partners that can help you do the job, and just make sure you're always thinking about your business outcomes and do small projects to get that change management. And once you get it, then the replication is much easier.
Terrific. And Jen, you get the last.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. Although cautious, that I think there's potentially big impact, and I think we need to be very mindful about including and giving a voice to the people within our organizations. And I would say, always a reminder, people, process, and technology, it all goes together. And so I think these are the things we need to make sure that when you go back, make sure you have a voice of they're thinking it, give them a space to voice it and help them become part of the solution. I think that's usually when change, any type of change works best.
All right, well, terrific. All right, well, then I will say thank you to our panel. I'm impressed and flattered by the fact that you would spend this time with us, so thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you. Hopefully this has been a productive conversation for you. It's certainly an area in which we will continue to invest our time and our energy because we think it's important. So I will say on behalf of the participants, I presume that we'll be all congregating somewhere outside afterwards. If anyone has specific questions, we've also got the Deloitte booth, which is just right outside these doors. So I'll wish you a great visit in Barcelona. It looks like the weather's great too, so everybody get outside this evening, and thank you. Thank you for being here.